podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hello, Peter. New week, new person. I'm excited to actually 2 in a row, Dr. Hamlet and now Dr. Lemons. This is...
2 weeks in a row.
This is
amazing,
an
right?
abundant...
Yeah, it's a real gift, particularly
in
like Hanukkah's going on, Christmas is coming. I mean, it's just, the gifts keep coming. It's really nice, yeah.
They do. I agree. I fully agree. I loved it. I truly loved it. I think he's again, one of the people that I like. How do you study with him? Can I join the cohort? That especially given the way in which he's approaching it, I'm like, oh my goodness, there's so much overlap with how we do our work. I'm like, oh, yeah.
I'm thinking, again, this is the second week in a row where we're talking about lifting up student voice. And he talks about shifting those mental models. And in fact, actually, if you don't mind, I'm just going to jump right into our sponsor this week because IXL is one of our sponsors. And when he describes the need actually of disrupting entrenched mental models to curate those like radically new experiences that help people see the system differently, it made me actually think about the tools that do exactly that for teaching and learning. So IXL, it's one of those tools, Jamie. I bet you didn't see that coming.
Oh, no.
I know. I surprised you. But it gives educators real-time insights. Hey, you're laughing over
Master.
I know. But I was like, let me think about this. So yeah, they do give educators real-time insights that shatter those old assumptions about who's learning, what they've mastered, where they need support. It's the kind of clarity that helps an entire system see itself anew and act accordingly. IXL. You can check them out at ixl.com/imperfect. Okay.
That's great.
Yeah.
Excellent. I feel grateful. For getting a partner that's as helpful as IXL and as broad as someone that can help in multiple different ways.
Yeah, agree. But that's the thing. I mean, he did talk about shifting those mental models. He talked about student voice and, of course, this idea of understanding that we're all flawed. And so, at any rate, I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
What do you want people to listen for as we're going into it?
I think that, to me, that phrase of 50 basically said you can't talk people into a new mental model. And I could not agree more in my 55 years of life, 30 years of public ed, I have spent more time walking down the path of trying to convince people of a different experience. And that has just been, it's like walking.
So when I just tell them, you're wrong, that doesn't...
You're doing it wrong.
Doesn't work. I mean, with anything, you're wrong.
Doesn't work.
It's wrong. When we come back, I want to tell you a story about basically where I said you're wrong. And boy, that kind of fossilized that individual in their mental model. That was a really unhelpful and destructive one about children. So there you go. Talk about an imperfect leader. Yay. But it was like unbelievable. But I'll tell you about it on the other side.
I think we should jump into Dr. Lemons and let people listen. This is a brilliant educator. Sometimes I know how well connected you are. I know how I'm just sort of impressed every time I'm like, oh, we're going to talk to this person. Like, how did you even meet this person? But then sometimes you get to these people and I'm like, oh, Lord.
I know.
I'm doing something wrong because Peter,
he knows Jennifer Cheatham. He knows all these people. Obviously, he works closely with her and these are friends of the pod as well. So it's nice to keep growing our network and our community. We're going to go right into it now. You're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzon.
We will see you on the other side. Today on An Imperfect Leader, we are honored to have Dr. Richard Lemons, Executive Director of Partners for Educational Leadership on the program. And with decades of experience advancing equity and systemic improvement in schools across the U.S. and around the world, Richard brings deep expertise in leadership development, instructional quality, and lasting change. From the Education Trust to teaching at Yale to teaching the Broad Masters for Systems Leaders to Harvard's Change Leadership Group, and now leading networks of superintendents and district partners, Richard's work has consistently focused on improving outcomes for all students. You're really one busy person, Richard. But let me formally welcome you. Welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be on this podcast with you. And as I was mentioning to you before we started rolling, it's been a joy to find the podcast, and I've been going back and listening to previous week's editions, and I appreciate the enthusiasm that you're bringing to talking about education in a hopeful way and the kind of stance of inquiry toward it. I deeply appreciate that.
Thank you so much for saying that. I'm really thrilled to meet you. You and I, we share a friend in New Canaan, Connecticut, Superintendent Brian Lutzy, and he's a regular listener. So let's embarrass him by talking about how intelligent he is and how caring he is, how selfless he is. And I hope you're blushing now, Brian. But your affiliation with him makes me even more excited about today's conversation. You and I also have another connection in Greg Meyer in North Carolina, state senator, who's deeply concerned about educational issues. Your background, as I know we mentioned all these other networks, but you were a teacher, you've been a literacy coach, you've been a change coach. So if it's okay, let's talk about Partners for Educational Leadership. Its mission to reimagine teaching and learning, dismantle instructional inequities, and support systemic improvement so that all students can flourish. That's directly from your site. And so with this ambitious mission, how do you see the role of leaders in driving these really significant, often challenging systemic changes, and really in the face of what has really become some deeply entrenched issues? So what I mean is mental models rule systems. So what are some ways that you begin shifting mindsets or finding common ground, and sometimes in competing ideologies? Just an easy one, just to start with. Just like a little softball.
It's a big question.
There's so many... Hey, good morning. Here's a big one.
There's so many entry points into that. Even into the frame up. So ideologies aside for a second, I think that this is really tough work. Shifting people's mental models is really tough work. We work in organizations where the truths, the mores, the assumptions about how you do the work aren't taught explicitly. We're socialized into them. We're socialized into them when we start our apprenticeship at age 5, when we start showing up as a kindergartner, and we begin to receive all these signals about what it means to be school, what it means to do school, what it means for a classroom. What does a classroom look like, sound like? And those signals are powerful. They're quietly cacophonous. The signals are really strong, but no one is saying, this is how a classroom works. We pick them up. And because of that, the mental models around them, they become these cultural scripts that we're enacting all the time, but we're rarely stepping out of and going, maybe we're actually enacting the wrong play here in this script. We've been working at this for 30 years, and we have not cornered the market on success. We are a work in progress ourselves. If there's one truth that we've stumbled into over these 30 years, it is that you can't talk anyone into a new mental model. It just doesn't work that way. So I think our most powerful hypothesis right now is that you have to curate radically new experiences for people so that they can experience something that is outside of their mental model. Now, it's not just experiencing. It's not just, we did something cool and unique. And it requires that experience has to position people in a way where the experience itself is powerful enough to make them porous and open to thinking anew, talking anew. And it has to create an opportunity where there's a little bit of disruption in how they're thinking about the work. Some assumptions get raised, some opportunities to think. And their mental model has to be moved outside of them. Sometimes literally, visually. Sometimes we'll ask people, draw a picture of what you think high quality teaching and learning is. And then we make people talk to each other about the drawings and make them scrutinize what's missing in your visual. So we use these tools to try to create these very powerful experiences that have the opportunity to actually change people and how they think about the work. And it's the experience itself, but there's also this moment of having people scrutinize their own mental model, see their mental model, have it move outside of them so they can test it, see it, and realize that they are somehow held in place by this mental model. And we have a few different ways that we try to do that. But
I'm curious about one. Only as you were describing this, I wrote down a little note where I said, scenario building. That's one piece, just written sort of scenario building and ask people to consider a situation and then how they might respond, and doing that in a group way that others can raise some of those concerns and mindsets that people might bring to a situation. And then I thought about when I was a principal, I engaged with a local agency, CMCA, the Central Missouri Community Action, and they led poverty simulations, and I was a little suspect of them. However, when we sat down and planned it, individuals who receive services through CMCA are paid to help facilitate. And so every individual is given an identity, and they have to live through the week in assuming this new identity and having to engage the community in a very different and radically different way. And then the power. So you have to figure out your bus schedule. You have to pay for your utilities. Did you get a receipt? No, you didn't get a receipt, and your utility didn't get turned on. And then it was all of these pieces. And then the power, though, was in the fishbowl following, talking about it side by side, not talking about it while individuals who help facilitate, whose daily lives are these lived experiences, but rather together to better understand. And I thought deeply conservative people in the middle of Missouri have a real shift in the way that they thought about individuals who are living well below the poverty line, who are just trying to make it work for them. And so even statements like, when you judge me about not coming to a parent-teacher conference, I want you to consider just the victory in making it through the day to get my kid the meal and the love and the attention. And it was so powerful. So I wonder, that might be a situation or a similarity to something you've done?
I've been through, it might even be the exact same poverty.
I'm sure it's
gone through it. It's quite powerful. And my adult learning expert friends might talk about those as they're so powerful to create change of body states. Like your temperature even goes up. You start to break a sweat. You get flush and more likely to encode some of those memories into long-term memory.
Yeah. And the shame that you feel about the judgment you had about.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we've used simulations, problem-based learning. We've also gotten a lot of power out of, I think the simplest way to call it is juxtaposition, putting two competing approaches side by side that are distinct enough where you can see the choices people made and scrutinize them. So one example that we do is around teaching and learning. There's an old exercise that came out of the Harvard Change Leadership Group that we ran thousands of times with people, had a lot of data on it, that we would show people a lesson. It was a 10th grade English lesson. It was rather mediocre, and we would ask people to grade it. And there would be this spectrum from A to F, and it would create this very powerful conversation. And that in and of itself, that experience itself reminded people, well, we don't even agree on what good teaching and learning is, and we're the people supposed to be leading it, right? So what does that mean? But then there was this other powerful component that we added where we showed people a lesson, sometimes 10th grade also, sometimes 3rd grade, where just the quality of practice was higher. The demands, the cognitive demands put on students were raised, and the care that teachers took in lifting students' thinking up in a powerful way and ensuring that every child in the classroom, and we would make people watch it, and then we would ask people, so what do you think about the first lesson now? And they're like, oh my goodness, like I gave that thing an A. But the quality of thinking in this 3rd grade classrooms is 7 times better than that. What am I thinking? It's challenging my own mental models about what's possible with students. Another way we do this is by trying to bring people in direct relationship with a positive outlier. So sometimes this is, okay, let's take people on a field trip, right? Let's go find an exemplar. But the exemplar itself never works. It's that debrief, it's your version of the fishbowl that's required after. Somebody has to curate that discussion that happens after us. What are you really seeing here? What are the choices that this school is making in how they organize time, space, and students? Why do you assume that you couldn't do that in your school? And the other thing that we always face in this is that the students have to be comparable enough, because adults are quick to say, I couldn't do that with my kids. You can do that.
Not in my district. Oh, we're different. Yeah. We used to say everybody wants to Columbia-ize it because they're like, it couldn't work here, so we'd have to do it this way.
Exactly.
And I imagine, just because you and I share this friendship with Brian, and I have to imagine that he associates himself with other superintendents who do this, and I imagine that part of this is the conversation that comes out of your work, is that he's so careful about trying to co-create with both teachers and with children. That if they are going to be the beneficiaries of a new way of thinking or a new way of doing, that they ought to be a very part, not just at the end of here we go, how do you think it should look, but rather really from the very beginning understanding the why there might be a shift or a change.
Absolutely. And we found that lifting up student voice in new creative ways is one of the most powerful forces going right now. If we can get students talking and adults listening, the noise about competing ideologies goes away, because students aren't having those ideological debates. They're saying, here's how I feel. Here's how I think I'm being treated. Here's what I want. And all of a sudden, it just gives you moral clarity.
Yeah.
And it builds up some urgency to do the work in an entirely new way.
I really do appreciate that you first parked it in a sort of a parking lot, the ideology piece, and then brought it back in terms of ideologies don't matter when the focus really is on kids, their learning, and what are they asking for. So I really appreciate that. Our guest today is Dr. Richard Lemons, Executive Director of Partners for Educational Leadership. In the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. There are 3 dimensions, and one is leaders learning work. And inside that dimension, there's the term systems thinking and system design. And Partners for Educational Leadership leads vital initiatives like the Connecticut Superintendents Network. You've facilitated networks like the Systemic Instructional Improvement Program, the SIP network. So I guess my question is, from your experience working with these really collaborative learning networks, what are some of those sort of common challenges that superintendents and leaders openly discuss within these environments? Because it's a lonely job, the superintendency. It's one where it's the whole reason why this podcast its genesis is how can we be a resource for the field for those who are trying to better understand the practice and have a thought partner each week who might want to talk about an issue that they've faced and what they learned from it. And so your network seems to be that really safe place to do that. What are some of those common challenges? And then how do the networks help address them?
We've placed a big bet at Partners over the last few decades in creating these spaces where either like teams or like role can go to work together, building new knowledge, exploring new themes, trying to investigate new topics. And the Superintendents Network is a really powerful one. And I will say, honestly, we're not always there in terms of creating those safe spaces. I think the superintendency is a role where the people who've made it to that role have learned how to guard themselves in some ways, how to put up a veneer around themselves. Not that they're always trying to look perfect, but it's a politically charged role, increasingly, but it always has been. And so if you come into some community and say, I really screwed something up, you wonder, was somebody going to go back to their friends, and their friends know people on my board, and all of a sudden I'm having a new conversation with my authorizing environment. So I just wanted to put that as a challenge, that the superintendent role of all of the roles that we work with is sometimes the most complicated in creating a robust, psychologically safe space because of the orientation to guard, which comes on. Back to your question of what of the topics that people are most willing to talk about. One are the politics, right? Our superintendents are hungry to talk about the challenges they face in their board, whether it's a dysfunctional board or whether it's a board that's distracted. How do they build that? How do they create the forces and partnerships in their broader community? And especially in the last 4 or 5 years, a lot of energy around how do we keep the focus in the right direction on students, on forward-moving progress, and without getting distracted by noise that is in the form of political action from people who are angry about things I'm not even sure I understand what they're angry about. So last year, for the first time ever as a network, we focused on a theme about the civic leadership responsibility of superintendents and how to manage the political forces at bay or in play so that we can work on teaching and learning. For the years before, if you weren't talking about teaching and learning, you were in the wrong network.
Yeah.
Last year, I thought the noise has gotten so large. We're gonna work on it.
It's almost as if I've always thought of the superintendency as a 3-legged stool. One being that you are the lead learner, you're the lead teacher, and the stool is no longer equal on the ground. It's a little clunky and rocks because the political piece seems to be a longer leg now, and it ought not to be that way. You've actually given me the idea that we should write a scenario like the poverty simulation and do the superintendency simulation for board members to go through so that they can see all the different ways that the internal and external systems are connected to each other and how it can be so challenging to be that central leader who's being pulled in so many directions. and then have that sort of inner circle, that fishbowl to say, what did we learn? What are we asking this one person?
I can imagine us leading this workshop at the National School Boards Association next.
I'm in. That'd be really cool. I could just see doing that. It would be I think fascinating. Anyhow, all right. Okay, so the role, tell me again the theme last year or this previous year?
Was understanding the new superintendency in 2025 and beyond, kind of the new realities, which would explicitly implied the politics of it. How do we manage those? How do we cultivate those forces? How do we mobilize? How do we buffer when we need to buffer? How do we create compelling visions that go beyond petty fights between people?
Yeah. Hey, that's really interesting. Particularly, so many of the superintendents have to deal with their school boards and then their local community, local leaders. I imagine superintendents like, I would say for me in Columbia, Missouri, so close in proximity to the state capitol, to a Jennifer Cheatham who was in Madison, right?
To the co-facilitator.
I had a feeling when I saw your affiliation with Harvard, I thought there's no way that these two don't know each other. And I just think the world of her. And I think about the fact that we were constantly being called to committee hearings because we're of our proximity to the Capitol. And then how do you navigate and negotiate state politics that are going to have an impact on all the local districts within your state? And so I love the fact that you called this and really called action to it as a real important theme for superintendents to think about.
I will say that there's another topic. There are probably two other topics that our superintendents are hungry to talk about. One of them, and it always bubbles up indirectly, it's the management of key leaders in their system. How do they bring the best out of their leadership team? What happens if they feel they have a somewhat weak link in a key role? How much do they invest in supporting and lifting up? And when do they say, I need to encourage this person to go find a better match? So those conversations are rich, and everyone experiences their versions of them. So people see themselves in each other's problems of practice around personnel, especially around the key leaders. And the other is around how do we actually move the ball in teaching and learning? What does it mean to move instruction at scale, especially when superintendents aren't doing the teaching? They're conditions builders around principals and around teachers to do the good work. And the way we explore that is getting them out in the classroom. So every other meeting, we take them on instructional rounds. The Superintendents Network was one of the birthplace of instructional rounds in our partnership with Harvard, with Richard Elmore and Lee Title as facilitators back in the day. And so we gave birth to this model of bringing leaders and other educators into relationship with classrooms. We still do it. We wrangle with what's the problem of practice that you're trying to solve? What data can we gather? What are we seeing in the classroom? What's the next level of work for this school? And it's one of these places where superintendents really are forced to wrestle with the dilemmas of moving instructional practice.
I think that's marvelous. All right, I'd like to ask you a question that I ask every guest who comes on our program. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
I knew this question was coming, having listened to the podcast now. It hits me in multiple ways. The first way is very autobiographical, just of how flawed I am as a leader. I live in my head around, why did I do that? Why didn't I do this? Why is this the right leadership practice? Is that? Luckily, I've given myself a lot of grace. Like gray hairs in my beard have given me permission to not necessarily be wise, but to assume there might be a little bit of learned wisdom and that no one's perfect and they ought to extend grace to myself. So it's okay to reflect and digest and to imagine what else I could have done, but it's not okay just to beat myself up because I'm an imperfect leader. So I think that's the first way. The second is probably best symbolized in conversations I've had with my colleagues at Partners for Educational Leadership, where we're often sitting around and at some point it'll come back to the reality that there are no educational superhumans that are coming to save us. That in fact, what we need to do is build the conditions where average people working really hard with discipline and intentionality and integrity can do magical things. And that actually is very exciting to me. So that notion of we're all flawed and it's going to take flawed leadership to get there, not superhumans. So that's another thing that strikes me. The third is very academic, but it does connect. So I'm sure you're familiar with that 4 stages of consciousness framework that's often used in adult development. So you begin as unconsciously incompetent, and then you progress to being consciously incompetent. And then you go to consciously competent before, if you really reach mastery, you're unconsciously competent. I think that second place of being consciously incompetent is a magical place. It's where you recognize you actually know what you don't know. And I think for leaders who live in that space, and incompetence is probably the wrong word, right?
Yeah, because sometimes I say imperfect is an important distinction from incompetent because you can make mistakes and learn from them. Incompetence, Keystone Cops is in my head for those who understand that reference.
But I think that if we take the kind of consciously imperfect, then you can see it. You understand it. You go into situations knowing you're likely to make some mistakes. Even if you do your best work, you're going to make some bad decisions, even though you had done all the right work before because you didn't know certain variables that none of us knew. And to me, that seems like a really exciting place. And if people have a kind of humbleness and in their consciousness and a confidence about it's okay to not be perfect, then I think that they're the kind of people who can lead continuous improvement. They're the kind of people who can create the conditions for others to place bets, take some risks, gather feedback to understand whether it's working or not, and celebrate the failures that produce new learning.
And we'll be right back. Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being, and I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of An Imperfect Leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom Project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention An Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
This is Greg Meyer, Jamie's partner at APC Leadership Collaborative. Superintendents know that school principals are the single biggest lever that any school district has for improving student joy and success. Unfortunately, there's very little professional development for the specific things that a principal has to do to improve their school. At APC Leadership Collaborative, we specialize in coaching principals to take on audacious goals, build their leadership skills, and make big improvements in their school. If that inspires you, let's connect and talk about how we can collaborate. Find APC Leadership Collaborative online at apccolab.com.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of An Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Richard Lemons, the Executive Director of Partners for Educational Leadership. And in this segment, as we do each week, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they made or observed or can share, and then we discuss it. All right, Richard, what happened?
Peter, I knew this was coming, put a lot of thinking into it. And the one that comes to mind for me is not one. It's actually multiple. And they all fall into a category that superintendents would call HR. So as superintendents know, sometimes there are things you can't talk about in HR issues. So what I'll say will be bird's eye view. But over the last 20 years in leadership positions, I've had the opportunity to bring people into an organization or people into a community of practice. And I think there have been 3 or 4 times where, for whatever reason, the other attributes of the individual, the reputation, the enthusiasm of other people, I have suppressed my gut around whether the person shares my values. And it always goes the wrong way. So does the person fundamentally believe in the capacity of human beings to get better? Like that's core to all the work I do. You can't have somebody in the organization who just likes ideas but thinks humans are the problem all the time instead of systems are the problem. I have to have people who are willing to embrace being imperfect and being in community with other people who are imperfect, because we're a collaborative. All of my organizations have been very collaborative spaces. And so you have to be willing to collaborate. I don't want to hire people who want to go off to their own island and create their own knowledge and be by themselves because it's inconvenient and it takes a little bit longer to do work with other people. Or people who aren't centering kids in equity. And I'm not talking about bad people. I'm talking about really great people who weren't perfect matches because there were some values issues. They're not integrity issues, not bad people, but some values in alignment to the culture that we were aspiring to create, either in the community of practice or the organization. And it created pain for other people, discomfort for the people who were brought in, and ultimately exits. And not always us exiting people and people saying this wasn't a good match for me. And it's taught me that I've got to not suppress the little Richard up on my shoulder saying, who is this person as a human being? Explore how they think and feel about issues of integrity and issues of students and issues of collaboration and what matters to them. Push comes to shove, what matters to them.
It's interesting. Everybody brings to an organization, they should be bringing their own individual personal values. And then how do those values stitch into the organization's values? So when I think about the questions that I typically ask, so what happened? So in this case, you've given some examples of individuals that have been part of your networks that had you may have overlooked listening to just what your gut was telling you in terms of this person is quality, intelligence, quality person, likely, and there's still something missing here in that their personal values seem to be at odds with our organizational values of the capacity for humans to change and grow and become better versions of themselves. I don't know. And I'm curious about this work because I get to work with superintendents around the country from time to time. And what I've learned is that when I overlook those first meetings of tell me your values, who are you? And sometimes there's value statements are listed and I say, oh, those are nice. Those are interesting. And they certainly convey your values, I think. I want to know your 3 to 5, who are you? When you're making decisions, how do you filter them? And so I don't mean to add a value statement. I appreciate that you can separate, you're a person of integrity to this person. I recognize you're not going to steal or cheat others. The value that we're looking for, or I wonder if we could unpack that and define what does integrity mean for you, or what are your actual values about doing this work? Is that connecting on any level in terms of what might have gotten overlooked or how you approach things moving forward?
I think you've heard me. I also appreciated the kind of thinking about it in an interview scenario, like the practicality of that. What I've gone to storytelling as a really powerful.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me, and without a lot of prep, tell me a time where you were doing work that excited you, that you think the work represented who you are as a human being.
Very much appreciative inquiry. Tell me about a time where you were energized.
When you felt at odds with how things were working out. And then let's talk through those for a long time. This is not a 3-minute story. This is going to be a 20-minute conversation where you tell me the story and we unpack it together. And I feel like you get to a deeper level of dialogue and the person reveals more about themselves. And I reveal more about myself, and we have the potential of really beginning to understand each other.
I guess I'm curious about the role of relationships through these pieces, because if I understand correctly, I shifted you towards the pre-conversation so that you would make decisions maybe differently in the future. In this case, these are individuals who joined your network, were part of the work, and it appeared either from their own understanding that they said there's conflict here, not direct in terms of anger, but just this isn't the right fit for me, or vice versa, that you came to that conclusion. What were you learning about relationships through these situations?
I think what I was learning was a lot of what Amy Edmondson's been writing about for decades up at Harvard Business School.
Sure.
That there are conditions that can be put in place that create psychological safety for teams and organizations where people can truly bring their best selves to a space, and that the work is better. And then there are things, sometimes subtle things, that can be done by individuals, the leader, the culture in the room, how we set things up, that suck that psychological safety away and people shield themselves. And that, to me, so it's not just about, do I like you? It's, am I going to bring my best self when in the room with you? And I think those are two different things.
Yeah, I think so. Amy's work is fascinating. And of course, Google is grateful for her for figuring this out. I'm curious, as you and your networks do this work, what might be a way that you structure those convenings or structure a team meeting or a cabinet meeting to really help bring out the best in people so that there is that, my colleague Zach Taylor calls it positive connectedness. Psychological safety is a synonym. What are some that you're doing that?
I think it goes back to experiences.
Yeah.
About designing experiences for our team, design experiences for our networks, where people get to know each other at a deeper level, where they can lower their shields. And sometimes that's curating the physical space. Like, we're literally going to take people we're going to take 30 superintendents to a park and put them in a circle out under the sun with trees around us, just to.
Otherwise, it sounds like torture. You're under the sun. I hope you've got an SPF 75 because we're going to resolve this issue, or you're going to be toast.
Exactly. But it's also the work you put people into. So we deeply believe that you learn the work by doing the work. And anytime you bring people out of their workspace, there's an artificiality to it. So can we curate the conditions where what we're working on in this third-party space, a conference room, a retreat center, your boardroom, is around the kinds of thinking and doing and being that you have to do in your real work. So let's use case studies, dig into them, and then put people on the spot to have to role play in particular roles and get some feedback. Let's have you bring in your own micro case studies, problems of practice to wrestle with. Let's have you bring to life these issues of what it means to be a superintendent in 2025 and beyond into the room. Give us your context, give us the issues, tell us what you've been working on, and tell us the question that you're still trying to answer for yourself. Don't defend the answer you've already come to. Really take an open stance. We also create a lot of space for people just to break bread together. Our meetings start 30 minutes before the actual agenda starts, with food, coffee, with the whole purpose of just break bread.
That's an important lesson on relationship, the value of just being in a space together. And as you've noted, it's not behavior, it's the structures of a system that create those behaviors. And so you've created an important structure of space
trying.
Yeah. Huh. As you look back on at least the three that you've described, what would you have done differently? What could you have done differently? And you, not the system.
No. I think that there's obviously let's go all the way back to the beginning and trust my gut, do a better job of inquiring into those values and have some honest conversations around, is there a match here or not? And not letting the other variables and the other attributes of the individual just totally trump the equation. I also think that there are spaces for early conversations. So let's talk about what happened in this meeting. Tell me what you were thinking. Tell me about what you were feeling. What was your agenda here when you said the following thing? And I think that there were times in those the examples are further in the past where I would have been, they'll get there. I don't want to put them on the spot too early. I want to trust that they're good people. They'll come to realize it. And I realize it's not about them being good people. They're already good people. They were good people. But good people can also disagree and be mismatches for an organization. So creating moments and time to create a feedback loop, but not a feedback loop of you're out of line or in line, but a feedback loop of I observed something. Here was the antecedent. Here was the reaction in the room. Can you help me make sense of this? So it's a co-constructed meaning-making opportunity. And as early into the process as possible.
I was going to say, that's what I've also learned. It's a gift that we give. It really, truly is, as much as one would say this kind of feedback that sometimes can be perceived as criticism, although when we do it well, it's more about coaching. And then it's a real gift when you let it go on, that it's, why didn't you tell me sooner kind of thing? Or I didn't understand intent versus impact kind of thing. Always we end with the question of what was something that was good that came out of these experiences. And I imagine as you've moved forward, that there's continued benefit. There's an appreciative piece to this. So What was good?
So one level, individual learning. So all of my many failures have created lots of opportunity for growth, right? So that's the beauty of it. It's that consciously imperfect and working on it. I love it. So I bring back to the brand, but I think it's right. The other is there have been moments where others around me were willing to give up earlier on people, and the trust in them along with the coaching, along with the support structures, and along with honest conversations have turned people into invaluable members of a community or an organization or a network. And to the point where people go, I'm surprised. Like I wouldn't have bet on this 2 years ago. And now this person's just offering so much richness and depth and community and collegiality to this community that I can't imagine not having them in it.
This is what I was thinking as you were describing that, which is a metaphor of most of us are basically just walk-ons trying to make the team. No one has trained us beforehand how to do this work. We were good teachers. We became pretty good principals. We built small networks within our schools, and then we're thrust into these system-wide networks with sometimes competing interests inside and outside the system. And so not giving up on any one of us, I think, is essential. Just truly, I appreciate your answer and the work that you're doing. My last question, because you are in this position of interacting with so many, what advice would you give to the aspiring leader?
I would say, first, find your people. It's a lonely job. You said this earlier. And find your people for the many purposes you need. So there's going to be a group of people you're going to need to go have beers with every other Friday, 30 miles away from your town where you're leading in, to blow off steam. And there might not be the same people that you want to be in a superintendent's network with. Totally fine. But the number of people who will say to me in a superintendent's network, whether it's Connecticut Superintendent's Network, whether it's a group that I help guide for the Tri-States Consortium or other networks that I've run over the last 20 years, where people say, this is the only space. I have other spaces. My professional association does really important work on policy, on advocacy, on negotiating with the state. This is the space where we're working on becoming better leaders. And this is the space where I can be honest as I feel like I can be with other people about how imperfect I am and how complex the work is, and I'm not a superhuman. And so you need spaces like that. Your spouse can't do it for you. Your kids can't do it for you. It's totally unfair to bring that to them. What you need is people who get the work. And there's so few people who really get it at the same level you do. So I think find your people. And then once that, build an amazing team around you. But find your people.
Our guest today was Dr. Richard Lemons, Executive Director of Partners for Educational Leadership. And I'm going to go with find your people here as I think about the way I want to end our conversation. Before that, I want to say I never thought of age 5 as an apprenticeship, the beginning of your apprenticeship. I am going to run with that. I love that idea. And I also think about how we're socialized on the playground with all the nonsense that kids bring to the playground of things that they've overheard and how they are being socialized. Like, I can think about the silly, really ridiculous things that I probably repeated, just not even knowing what they meant. So the apprenticeship starting at five years old was pretty fascinating to me. More than that, though, when you say find your people and having that impact, and thinking of your North Carolina roots, I hope this doesn't offend you with Coach K in my mind. But Coach K had so many assistant coaches who became really incredible coaches all across the country because of the system that he had built and then their ability to influence so many other teams. And I really see the network that you have cultivated that is the longest, as we understand in the nation, of more than 30 years at this point, that really the network that you're building with its foundation on at least 2 values that I can think of: relationships and grace. That ability to give yourself permission to learn from your experience and not feel shame for it, to grow from it and to build. So thank you so much for joining me today and really bringing just such an important message to our superintendents across the nation.
No, Peter, thank you. This was a joy, just the ability to talk with someone about wrestle with these big ideas. And thank you for doing this podcast. It's a powerful resource for the field, and I'm going to be sharing it on a regular basis.
Oh, I hope you will. So we're back. Jamie, what's one thing that sort of comes to mind immediately as we come into this? Because I know when we were off camera, you started to talk a little bit about curation, about a radically different experience. So talk a little bit about that.
Curating, what did he call it? I want to pull my notes. Curating.
Radically new experiences for people.
Yeah, curating radically new experiences for people. And the way that they're doing it as an organization is, I think, fascinating to me, because I think they're sort of levels. And the one question that I have is the ways in which our current school culture, whether or not it does that. Like, I don't think public schooling curates for students radically new experiences. And so as a result, it replicates, for the most part, everything that's been replicated forever. And the first time that they get any kind of curated new experience, it's after as a senior, right? Once they're done, they're then going on to some other truly radically new experience. Like, they leave for college, they leave for the military, they go into a trade school, any number of things, but all those things are so radically different than what you just did. That's the first time. My God. Maybe to the point of Mosaic. Like, at least Mosaic is creating an experience that's radically different than school.
So Mosaic, for those who have been listening, as long as you didn't skip through our commercials, Mosaic Project is an amazing organization, and they really do create a radically new experience for kids to really begin to empathize. And they actually have a song around empathy, and they say, entropy? No, empathy. And so it's amazing.
So can you share the experience you shared with Dr. Lemons about that radical experience that you had? Because it didn't come out clear in the interview. What did you go through that caused a new aha? You talked about experiencing shame as a result of it. And so I'm interested to know what happened.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad I used the word shame, because it really was. I like to say that while I grew up in New York, that I sort of woke up to the world, I didn't fully understand the chasm that existed between class, between race, all the kinds of things that sort of lived in a bento box. New York is kind of a bento box in that you have your neighborhoods and your experience, and you don't necessarily always interact with others. And so I get to Oakland, and I have a first experience in sort of understanding, at least to the level that I thought I understood, totally new experience in terms of what real poverty looks like. And then I thought I was ready. And then I get to Columbia, Missouri, thinking not a problem. And I got to see poverty in a whole different light, more rural, suburban. And so we do this poverty simulation. I'm thinking, I got this. And it was talk about a radical new experience, because we had to sort of live a week we were each given identities and live the experience of person in poverty within the community, and just accessing just utilities was such a task. I didn't have a car. I didn't have bus fare. I had enough bus fare to get there and back. But then I had to go back again because my power wasn't on. And so when I finally get over to the utility, they're like, do you have a receipt? No, I paid in cash. And so like, we have no record. There's nothing we can do. And I'm like, this doesn't happen. But yet we did this big fishbowl together, this big circle. Some people were watching and others were within the fishbowl talking, along with the individuals from our community who led the simulation. So not as a way to sort of gawk or it was an authentic conversation to say, if you're going to be able to better understand the families in your school, you have to understand our experiences because these are their experiences. And so, yeah, I felt shame because I thought, I've got this. No, I was just a kid from New York who was parallel playing with people in poverty. But I had my own sort of path that I was on. And it really shifted the way that I operated, encountered, interacted, and I have a hard time shutting up, but to shut up and listen. And so people would sometimes get mad at me because people would come to school all really angry, cursing, threatening, and they would want me to immediately no trespass them. And I'm like, nah. First of all, we got to look for the gold nuggets in this conversation because this person is scared, anxious, frightened for their child, right? And so we're once all levels of anger, frustration, all that, when we cool down a little bit, we'll have another conversation about, hey, the next time you come up here, you don't have to curse me out to get what you need. You can count on me to listen. But in that moment, I'm not yelling, don't you talk to me that way. I'm calling the cops or you're going to be no trespass. Okay. Who loses in the end? I think that's
right. Exactly.
I think because I can tell you in the past, I might have said, we're no trespassing that lady. My God, what a nutcase. She's not coming up here anymore. Talk to us that way.
Right.
Nope. So that's what I meant by shame. I just learned so much.
It makes me think of I appreciate you sharing that story. That's really helpful.
Too bad I'm editing
I don't
it
think
all
people
out.
get to go.
I'm kidding. I'm not. I'm going to keep it. When did you feel shame? Never. Oh, and then I'll put back.
Never.
I'm so glad that you shared that story.
If you said that, you know how many Jews would be like, what the hell? He is out. He's out. He's not a Jewish person.
I know.
Don't feel shame. It's the self-identity. It's the entire identity of the Catholic.
That's
religion.
interesting because I hadn't even thought about shame and guilt being synonymous. I guess I see them as complementary, but shame, guilt seems temporary. Shame is enduring. At least that in my mind.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I chose that word shame because I was wow, all these years of working with families, helping and supporting, but not shifting necessarily some of my mental models in terms of norms, how people should talk to each other or the decisions that people make about their lives and how they spend their money and things like that. I had shame because I didn't remember or even think about even things like the most human emotion, the most human element for any of us is belonging. And so you choose to spend money on expensive shoes so that your kid can feel like he belongs because everything else in their life is just horrible. Who am I to judge?
Yeah, that's the definition. Who am I to judge? You're not. You can't. It's not. It's normal to judge, but the practice is really in the realizing that's happening and being able to set it aside and let that person flourish and be the full person that they are. It makes me think of the connection I want to make to your story is way back when. Everybody remember? Did you remember Super Size Me with Morgan Spurlock? Did you see that movie, that documentary?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Obviously, some things have been sort of revealed about that movie that is not totally accurate about how things went. However, it did absolutely shift the way that I behaved. It was a radical experience in terms of when the doctor says your liver is becoming foie gras, I was like, oh.
Yeah. He did a show. He created a show as a result of that experience called 30 Days. And it didn't last long. It was 2 seasons. And what it was, curated experiences, 30 days of curating an experience in somebody else's shoes. And there's a bunch of episodes that aren't all that interesting. But there's 2 that I want to talk about. One specifically is the exact thing you're talking about, but for real. He and his wife lived at the poverty line in Columbus, Ohio. And they did it for 30 days. And everything you're describing is exactly what happened. Basically, his manual labor job that paid a minimum wage As soon as he got injured, which was within week 1, he got injured, he was screwed. He was out because it relies on him showing up and being able to do the physical work. He didn't have the ability to do that, so the money's gone. He doesn't have health coverage, so that costs money to get what he needed in order to get back to work. And it just compiles. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think even if all you do is watch this episode, it's such a clear description of what it was like and his big ahas of what it's like to live at the poverty line. And the other one, the second episode that I'd encourage people to go watch, is an episode where this was back in the time of the Minutemen. Do you remember the Minutemen at the border? It's about immigration. And there's a man who is definitely pro or anti-immigration. And he, for 30 days, lives with a Mexican family in Los Angeles and slowly becomes aware of what it's like to live in that space and to be in that space and who these people are, who this child is. And,
I want to see that.
It shifts it's riveting. It's truly riveting. He's Cuban from Miami. And so his immigration story is so different than the Mexican immigration story. And I put it here because that's not doing it yourself. But there is benefit, and it's an easy way to at least get a snapshot of what it's like to actually go through that radical experience that Dr. Lemons is talking about. Curating it, there's multiple levels of curating. The one level that you mentioned was doing scenarios, going through scenarios or practice. We do that. That's exactly what APC does all the time, is perpetually creating different scenarios for different kinds of conversations. And what would you do now? And what I love about the scenarios is the idea that you can practice in that space, mess up, and try again. When you go into the real world, you go into the boardroom, you go into wherever it is that you're going to have to do this work, you don't get to try again. It is what it is. So getting some practice space to really become aware of that other experience.
I mean, so your words become like your muscle memory, right? Because that way you can just, Going into the conversation, I said to you, I want you to remind me about a time where I just said you're wrong. And how the ripple effect to that was, I was doing an equity training with a partner. You always do them in pairs, and you always do it with someone who does not share your identity. So that way you can lift each other up or be there for each other or support each other. Should there be your buttons get pushed or your experience, you can step in, or their experience, they can step in and provide some understanding. And however, my brain sometimes works quickly, and I responded before my partner could step in. She then stepped in, but not before, and I was superintendent because I thought it was important the superintendent be part of the training. So not only am I just an individual telling this person, you're wrong, but I was also the superintendent, which, you don't get to necessarily shelve your title. So now I've got this teacher going, superintendent just told me I was wrong when I thought I was maybe in a space where I could say something I believed even though it was wrong. So basically the guy goes, so we're just going to let kids just run the halls and because when they want to misbehave, because we're not going to. And I was like so mad by that just ignorance as opposed to taking a step in. Oh, I hear what you're saying in terms of thinking that if in fact we use restorative practices, that sometimes people think that there aren't consequences. There are always consequences for one's behavior. But when we talk about discipline, there's a difference between, and you've said this to me a number of times, Jamie, between punishment and consequence. We don't have to punish the kid where we then fossilize that child's sort of belief about whether or not I belong in this space, but rather having a logical consequence. And I didn't even live that with this individual. I mean, I had to find him, go talk to him and be like, I owe you an apology. Here we were in a space where, and I just jumped down your throat to be like, you're wrong. So, yeah. I mean, if I had an opportunity to practice that in advance, what are you going to do when they say, so we're just going to let kids run wild? And I think he said run like animals. I think it was it was dripping with racism.
Degrading. It was degrading.
Yeah. So I just lost it. But lost it in that quick moment. But man, if I had been able to practice that as a scenario, what are we going to do when someone says that? Be like, because you're like, oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I could have just said that. Because no, what we're talking about is the punishment versus consequence. Of course, there's consequence for running the halls, right? So anyway.
Yeah, everything about Again, what a great example of humble leadership. You sharing that story here. I know you're no longer superintendent, but just share that you were superintendent in that space and the impact that has in relation to that particular leadership moment. The number of times I've been in that exact moment, that space, I've led equity and specifically conversations about race, trainings about race for years. And I've done that, made that mistake a zillion times.
Yeah.
Just jumping down people's throats when ignorance shows up. And what I've learned is I will say, you probably had you created an interruption for that person.
Sure.
But I don't know
as he went
that
home and
interruption
applied
was
for
something
jobs in other districts. But But I'll say,
Correct.
thinking about Richard Lemons, one of his quotes when I asked him about, tell me what you think about an imperfect leader. And he said, so that notion of we're all flawed and it's going to take flawed leadership to get there, like we're not superhuman.
Yes.
Man, I wish I had heard that in that moment, or at least the next day as I felt guilt, not perpetual shame, but guilt about, man, I could have done that differently. And I should have done that differently.
Yeah. There's a better question there to ask. Even if one that says, do you really believe that I would, cause that to happen? And that question, before even getting to, do you believe the kids are animals? Because that's a weird metaphor that you're using. And the answer is no, probably not. But he's hurt. That person is hurt. He's tired. He's overwhelmed. All of the things.
That's a good point. Also, after a long day, new teachers, I always did the new teacher training. So new teacher, likely overwhelmed, and likely has had a hard time having kids listen, or at least pay attention when he says, stop running. And meanwhile, that's where you do some of the training around, instead of telling kids to stop running, focus on what you do want. Tell them to walk.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Tell them to walk. Tell them what you want, not what you don't want. Yeah.
These are basics. Anyway, but please, those of you that are listeners, this is another one. I said this earlier last week about Dr. Hamlet. I'm saying this about Dr. Lemons. This is a listen again kind of one. He says so much about different ways of approaching and thinking about leadership that I'm eating it up. I would take his course in a heartbeat. I think it's spectacular.
You've been listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. We're so glad you joined us this week. We'll see you next week. Bye, Jamie.
Bye, Peter.
Music for An Imperfect Leader was written and arranged by Ian Varley. Sam Falbo created our artwork, a wood print inspired Daruma doll butterfly. Remember, imperfect leadership is not a scarlet letter. It's a badge of honor. It recognizes that serving as a lead learner is about being a vulnerable leader, an empathetic leader, a compassionate leader. We are proud to be imperfect leaders, so join us next time for another episode of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast.